Hello everyone, welcome to my channel about Chinese stories. As you probably know, China has a long and rich history, but you might not realize that for about 300 years in modern times, China kept its doors closed to the outside world. While Europeans were bravely sailing across the world, Chinese people largely stayed at home and lost much of their drive to explore beyond their borders. As a result, China fell behind Western Europe after the age of the discovery and the Industrial Revolution. Western Europe became the center of wealth and industry, while China remained a traditional farming society. During this period, few Chinese people went abroad to learn the unknown world. As well, foreigners were not allowed into China. In the 18th century, China exported tons of tea and porcelain to Great Britain every year. In return, Britain sent loads of silver to China, but China wouldn't import British goods or industrial products. This created a huge trade imbalance, which frustrated the British. At last, in 1840, Chinese officials confiscated a lot of opium and refused to pay compensation. As a result, a war broke out between China and Britain. China lost. After signing the Nanking Treaty, China had to open its doors to Western powers in 1842. From then on, more and more foreigners were allowed into China, including Christian missionaries. Today, I'm going to tell you a story of a British missionary. He was also a Swiss citizen. The most amazing part is that he had been a prisoner of the Chinese Red Army for more than 18 months. His Chinese name is Bofu Li, and English name Alfred Bosshardt. Alfred Bosshardt was born in Switzerland. When he was 5, his parents moved to England. He grew up in Manchester, but he kept his Swiss nationality, which would save him many years later. In the first half of the 19th century, Christianity experienced a revival in Europe and America. Many missionaries went to China at this period. One famous mission was the China Inland Mission. In 1922, at the age of 25 years old, Alfred Bosshardt decided to join this mission. He wanted to serve in the poor part of China. Hold on. Before he left, he had to learn some basic medical skills. Why? We Chinese people are very practical. Many people believed in God to mainly get practical benefits, such as a good harvest, money, or health. If they didn't see these real benefits, it was hard to get them to believe in Christ. Before the 1950s, people in China had very little education or medical care. So, many missions set up schools, hospitals, and churches. Many people didn't believe in God until they got cured at the mission hospitals. Maybe you don't know, China didn't have a nationwide compulsory education until 1980s. That's really later. In this situation, if Bosshardt hadn't learned basic medical skills, it would have been very hard for him to serve in China. A few months later, Bosshardt waved goodbye to his mother and boarded the ship to China on October 2nd, 1922. On the way to Shanghai, he stopped at Marseille, Singapore, and Hong Kong. In Singapore, he was invited to feast by a Chinese man who had studied at a university in England. In the 1920s, Singapore was a British colony with many Chinese people. Some Chinese youth even went to England for college. In Shanghai, to his amazement, there were so many coolies and beggars. He arrived at the headquarters of the China Inland Mission and met the supervisor, Mr. Horst. Mr. Horst was one of the famous Cambridge 7. The headquarters were very clean compared with the streets outside. First, he had to study Chinese. After about 6 months, he could hold simple conversation with people. His teacher gave him a Chinese name, Fu Li. It meant to control yourself and follow the rules. In June 1923, he headed for Chongqing by ship along the famous Yangtze River. At that time, China was under the Republic of China, but in fact, many provinces were controlled by warlords, rebel armies, and bandits. He stayed in Chongqing for several months and witnessed war, death, and famine. His mission field was Zunyi in Guizhou province, about 250 kilometers away from Chongqing. To get there, he had to keep moving on foot. At that time, most of China had nice paved roads, no buses. The 250 kilometers from Chongqing to Zunyi usually took 7 or 10 days on foot. But for Bosshardt and his team, it took a whole month because they encountered bandits. They had to turn back. A few days later, they started again. Finally, they reached their destination just before Christmas. Guizhou province in southwest China is very mountainous, with few flat lands. In Zunyi, his mission field, there were about 30,000 people. He started his work the next day, reading his sermon to the Chinese believers. To his delight, they could understand him. I really admire people who can learn Chinese so fast. For me, I still cannot speak English freely, even after decades of learning. Can you help me? In fact, bandits were everywhere in Guizhou. Bosshardt ran into them many times. The first time, bandits kidnapped him for 5 hours and robbed him. The second time, they robbed him of his pen and some silver coins. The third time, they even took the clothes he was wearing by force. How unlucky. Some years passed. He was still single. Yes, he was single. One day, he was sent to Chongqing to meet and escort a colleague named Rose Piaget. She had just returned from a furlough in Switzerland. It was dangerous for her to travel alone in Guizhou, so Bosshardt went with her. At first, he didn't want to go, but his supervisor said, "Hurry up, this might change your life." And indeed, a beautiful girl was waiting for him there. He fell in love at first sight, but he didn't dare to speak out. They walked for 7 days on the road, and he stayed silent because he thought he wasn't good enough for her. When they arrived in Zunyi, Rose went on to Guiyang, her mission field. He started writing letters because he missed her so much. Every day he waited for her reply. 1 month later, he finally got a letter. Rose said he needed to ask her parents. To his delight, she also showed him a family photo, a very huge family with 62 members in total. Do you notice her family name? Piaget. Piaget, yes, it's the same as the famous water brand. The brand started in her village in Switzerland in the 1870s. But back then, back in the 1930s, it wasn't known worldwide. 1 year later, in 1930, they got married. Soon, they went to a new mission field in Zhenyuan. There, they worked together. Maybe their only misfortune was that they had no children. Rose had one miscarriage and never got pregnant again. October the 2nd, 1934, a very special day for him. It was the same day 12 years ago that he had left England for China for the first time. On that day, they were traveling back to Zhenyuan, their mission station. Yesterday, they helped the Hayman family with the Sunday service in Huangping town. Suddenly, a man in rags jumped in front of them. He was holding a gun. Don't shoot! Take anything you want, said Rose in Chinese. She was sitting in a sit-down chair carried by servants. At first, Bosshardt thought they were local bandits, but soon he noticed that their accent was different. In fact, they spoke with a dialect of Jiangxi. At the time, China has many dialects, and people often could not understand each other. Now, Mandarin, the official Chinese, was not yet common at that time. When he entered the village, he saw that about 1,500 people crowded together. On the walls, there were many slogans. Down with the warlords. Down with imperialism. Divide the land equally. Religion is the opium of the people. This was not the words of the local bandits. Who were they? In fact, there was a Red Army, the army of the Chinese Communist Party. Their belief was Marxism-Leninism. So Bosshardt became a prisoner of the Red Army that day. The next day, his friends, the Hayman family, was also captured. They were 5 people in total. The Hayman couple, his 2 kids from New Zealand, and Miss Grace Emberlin from Canada. The same day, they were charged as spies of the imperialism. In the first half of the 20th century, hostages kidnapped by the rebel armies or bandits were called politics. Foreign hostages were called foreign-tics. And here the term ticket means ransom. Now, how much ransom did the communists ask for these 7 foreigners? 100,000 silver dollars for every person. No discount for children. So that made a total of 700,000 silver dollars. Oh my God, that was a sky-high number in those days. For comparison, 2 months later, Mr. Stem and his wife were captured in Anhui province also by the Red Army. They demanded $20,000. Unfortunately, just 2 days later, they were killed publicly on the street. General Xiaoke, about 26 years old, was the leader of this Red Army. It had about 3,000 soldiers. Another army, led by General He Long, joined them 20 days later. They left northeast Guizhou province, passed southeast Chongqing, and finally arrived in northwest Hunan province. There, they set up a military base in later November 1934. They are called the Second Red Army. From 1934 to 1936, the Communist Red Army was attacked by government. Many soldiers died and their bases were surrounded. They had to escape in the following years, marching over 10,000 kilometers. Later, this escape became known as the Long March. It was made famous by Edgar Snow's book, Red Star over China. By chance, Bosshardt became a member of the Long March as a foreigner. The new military base was set up in the mountains. They could hide there when attacked by the government army. Bosshardt and Hayman were trapped there for about 1 year. As captive of the Red Army, did they have got special prison cells? No. In fact, they slept in horse stables, barns, or other small rooms. There were no beds, so they slept on the dirt or stone floors. Sometimes they could get a wooden board. They saw it as a God's care. How about their food? Very little, and not good. The Red Army was a guerrilla force. They had no regular income. In other words, they survived by looting from landowners and the rich. Whenever they came across a landowner's house, they took money, rice, and other goods. Then they divided the land among the poor people, kind of like Robin Hood. One time on a march, the soldiers bought a bull at the landowner's house and gave 2 pieces to Bosshardt and Hayman. They grilled the beef and found it very delicious. The Red Army liked to rob churches because, in their view, churches were the property of the imperialists. Since the 1920s, countries like Japan, Britain, Germany, Russia, and America, and so on, had been called imperialist invaders all over China. There were many churches in China, built by missionaries from America, Britain, Germany, and even Finland. As you know, Finland had only about 3 million people in the 1930s. But some Finns still came to China to do mission work. It really amazed me. In these churches, Bosshardt could find cheese and biscuits. These foods Chinese people didn't like. What they liked most were English books. Just one book could make them happy for a long time. How did they march with the army? The Red Army as a rebel force always marched at night on mountain trails. They kept away from the main roads for safety. Bosshardt and Hayman were not used to traveling in the mountains, so the commander gave them a mule to ride, one at a time. Because the Red Army got the army funds from looting landowners, Bosshardt met and talked with some hostages, including young men, old women, and children. One young man's ransom was about 1,000 silver dollars, and another man's was 7,000, depending on how rich they were. If the money wasn't sent on time, they would be killed. Bosshardt often heard the sound of whips and the clink of coins. Fortunately, neither of them were tortured, even though they had once escaped. They had escaped, yes. One night in December, they ran away as the guard went out for fun. They climbed over the wall and reached the foot of the hill by morning. They got meals from the locals, but nobody would hide them. People were scared that the soldiers would search every house. At last, both of them were recaptured 2 days later. Being foreigners, they were not familiar with the mountain trails. Can you imagine how far they had walked? 5 miles in 3 days. Because there are so many hills, they cannot find the correct roads. Then they were facing a terrible trial. The Red Army's trials had no legal meanings at all. Please have a look at how they decided people's fate. If they caught a landlord, a rich peasant, or suspected spy, the judge would bring the prisoner in front of the crowd. Hundreds of soldiers would gather to watch. Then the judge would ask, "What should we do with this person?" If the crowd said, "Kill," the prisoner was executed. If they said, "Beat," he was severely beaten. And if no one spoke up, the prisoner would simply be locked up. There was no justice at all. That day, the two of them were brought before the crowd for judgment. The judge asked, "What should we do?" One person shouted, "Kill." Another yelled, "Beat." Most of the crowd remained silent. In the end, the two were locked up again. It was a terrifying experience, a trial that had nothing to do with the justice. Most of the soldiers thought that both of them were friendly. Why? During the captivity, Bosshardt did something for the Red Army. First, General Silk got a map of Guizhou province in French from a Catholic church. No Chinese could read the French in the army, so Bosshardt helped translate into Chinese by lamplight. Although he grew up in England, he had learned French quickly after marrying Rose, the Swiss girl. Next, the soldiers had trouble seeing the Chinese version of the International. Bosshardt taught them how to sing it correctly. Third, he knew how to knit, so he made gloves, hats, sweaters for the soldiers. Some soldiers also learned English from him. The best students learned up to the 7th letter of the alphabet. Most soldiers were illiterate at the time. In conclusion, Bosshardt and Hayman kept good relations with the soldiers. Do you remember that I said the ransom was 700,000 silver dollars? Now, who on earth could pay such a huge sum? Well, the China Inland Mission took responsibility for rescuing them, but since the headquarters was in Shanghai, about 1,000 kilometers away, they entrusted a local mission to take charge. In the city of Huaihua, about 250 kilometers from the Red Army's base, there was a German church led by Pastor Herman Becker. He handled the negotiations. Pastor Herman Becker sent 3 Chinese believers to negotiate with the Red Army. The journey took 15 days on the road. There were no paved roads or cars in the 1930s there, so they had to walk. Unfortunately, near the base they were attacked by bandits. There, the bandits stole their identity papers, letters, and belongings. Without those documents, they could not approach the Red Army and had to turn back. Their first formal contact with the Red Army didn't happen until January 20th. The negotiator said that 700,000 silver dollars was a sky-high price for the church. In fact, Pastor Becker was an acquaintance of General Helong before Helong joined the Chinese Communists. He had visited their church. The church hospital once saved Helong's nephew from death. General Helong even wrote letters for thanks. However, he still said, "Business is business." After the first negotiation, the ransom was reduced to 100,000 silver dollars. In the following months, Chinese Christmas negotiated many times. The lowest demand was 20,000 silver dollars. Sometimes drugs or ammunition could be accepted instead of money. Even so, it was very hard for the church to raise so much money. By November 18th, 1935, 3 coolies carried silver dollars and medicine, was $10,000 in total. The communists released Mr. Herman only. He weighed just 94 pounds after 400 days in captivity. A few days later, the Red Army set out for their long march to avoid attacks from the government army. The long march would cover 10,000 kilometers across many rivers, snow mountains, swamps, and grasslands. How about the fate of Bosshardt? The Red Army left their base and headed south, passing through Huaihua, where Mr. Becker's church was located. The Red Army besieged the town for 5 days. Eventually, they gave up and turned west toward Guizhou province. During the five-day siege, about 20 missionaries were praying in the church. In fact, the communists didn't know that Mr. Becker was there. When the army entered Guizhou, another missionary, Heinrich Kellner from a German Catholic mission, was captured. The two men then became fellow prisoners. After passing through Guizhou, Bosshardt came into Yunnan province. When they reached the area near Kunming, General Xiaoke decided to set him free. He was in terrible health after more than 560 days in captivity. Before releasing him, the general invited him to dinner. He said that Switzerland was a neutral country without an army and not an imperialist state. Bosshardt was given 10 silver dollars for the fare to Kunming. That day was April 12th, the Easter day. Meanwhile, Herman Becker did not give up. Although it was very difficult to contact the marching army, he still sent Chinese Christians to follow them with medicine and money to Yunnan province. Finally, they caught up with the army and delivered the medicine, only to learn that Bosshardt had already been released. As for Heinrich Kellner, he was very unlucky. He was accused for being a Nazi German spy and an imperialist. About 10 days after Bosshardt was freed, he died on the road at only 28 years old. According to the communist records, he was buried in a coffin in Yunnan province. Bosshardt went to a hospital in Kunming, where he underwent a thorough examination. His health was very poor, that the doctor said he could only live for 10 days. But God spared him. He eventually passed away in 1993 after a long life. While still in the hospital, he recalled his experience as a captive in the Red Army. 4 months later, he headed for Britain, where he published his book, The Restraining Hand, to express his gratitude to God. That was about November 1936. Mr. Bosshardt and his wife spent 1 year in England and then another in America to make speeches. Yet they had not given up their mission in Guizhou province. They returned there in 1938. They witnessed China's hardship during the anti-Japanese war and even met American soldiers. In 1949, the Communist Party took power, establishing a Marxist-Leninist regime that forbade all religions. As a result, they left China forever in 1951, but they did not return England directly. Instead, they went to Laos, a country south of China, where they continued to serve God faithfully. From 1922 to 1951, Mr. Bosshardt had served in China for about 30 years. His wife, Rose Pierrat, died and was buried in Laos in 1965. After that, he finally returned to England. From 1950 to 1978, nearly 30 years, mainland China went through a very dark period. Millions of lives were lost under communist absolute control. Foreigners were almost completely shut out, and it felt as if even God had been shut out too. In the 1980s, China opened up again. Here, I am grateful to Mr. and Mrs. Bosshardt. They brought faith and love to land in misery. I thank them deeply. The darkness will pass, and one day sunshine will come again all over China. Thank you very much for putting up with my imperfect spoken English. In the future, I want to tell you some stories of foreigners who had lived in China. They were adventurers, merchants, diplomats, missionaries, doctors, or teachers. Thanks to their efforts, China moved out of its old traditional society and began stepping into modern times. See you next time.